So recording has started. Once again, uh, thank you for joining Azure Power Lunch. This call is being recorded and we place our recordings on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. So with that, we will start with our topic of discussion, which is Azure Spring Apps. So here is a um, quick agenda. We're going to talk about what are Spring Apps and kind of what are some of the quick overview of a Spring App features. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna spend a few minutes on kind of a higher, bigger picture of Java on Azure. So just if you have been using Azure, I'm sure you're aware of it. Even if you are not, Java is a first-class citizen on Azure. There is the ability to store, run Java applications on Azure. There are different, like Service Bus now supports JMS protocol, and that's just one of the examples. You can run, um, Java applications and on app service as well as Spring App, which is, if you're not aware, Java Spring is one of the most popular framework to develop Java application. Okay, and basically Spring Boot provides you certain modules. It's built on top of Java Spring framework, and you to build your application uh, and what Spring Apps provide you is the ability to run those applications in Azure without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. It's kind of similar to like app service. Like you have a web app, you can run that web app in Azure without worrying about using app service, without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. Same thing is true for um, Spring App. And if you are familiar with Azure Spring Cloud, um, this is a basically the next iteration of Azure Spring Cloud. So think of it, it and just the renaming. It's now renamed as Azure Spring Apps. So this is kind of what you call next evolution, iteration, or whatever you call it. And this is supported both by Microsoft and VMware. And throughout the demos and slide deck, you will see what are some of the key features that are supported by this platform. Okay, so first of all, as I just want to summarize, a fully managed platform to run Spring Apps supported by both Microsoft and VMware. You just need to bring in your apps, and that's it. Underlying infrastructure is all managed by Microsoft and VMware. Any questions so far? Okay, and once again, the thing is, normally you run these applications on Kubernetes, but in this scenario, you don't have to learn or know anything about Kubernetes. We run that infrastructure, as I said, for you. So here is kind of just a quick overview. So Spring Apps consist of two parts. One is a service runtime, which is the infrastructure pieces of the service that are run, and the second piece is your apps, which are Spring Boot apps that you bring in. So these are the two pieces. Okay. With that, you can connect to all of the Azure services. That can be databases, that can be storage, that can be other services like JMS, Kafka, things like that. So all of that are available, and you can connect to those services and the Azure services. Once again, the monitoring, first party monitoring platform like Azure Monitor, or if you want to use third party platforms like Splunk or Dynatrace, that are available for you as well. Support is there. And in order to, you can use managed identity, and at the same time, you can authenticate your application using Azure AD if you want. So that support is there. In regards to automation, CI/CD pipeline, you have first party tools like GitHub, Azure DevOps, and then third-party tools like Gradle and Jenkins and all of that. They are available at your disposal as well. And finally, in terms of developer experience, you can develop using VS Code or like Eclipse or IntelliJ. These are IDEs that are your disposal for use. And once again, both the entire infrastructure is supported both by Microsoft and VMware. So that's kind of a quick high-level overview of what this platform is. And it's very simple the way you deploy app. You know, first is you create the service, which is Azure Spring App Service. So 3 lines of code in terms of CLI. Second part is you create an app in that service. Okay. And the third one is you take the code or jar file of your service and deploy it. And that's it. That's all you have to do. And your service will start running in Azure Spring Apps. Okay. So, and by the way, this is kind of the entire ecosystem. So whatever services that you are used to, all of those services that in Azure are available, and you can use as a part of the Spring platform. You know, through Spring connectivity and all of that, because it's basically in regard to Spring, it's a modular framework, so you can add these services as you are building your applications in Azure. So quickly, I mean, this is kind of a high-level summary. For developers, it's easier to build and deploy their apps. And once again, for IT operations, since there is not an infrastructure to manage, they have less stuff to manage and kind of worry about. You know, Uh, it makes the overall IT operations easy, and for the executive, it's easier to estimate how much their solution will cost. You know, and it's easier to deploy. Kind of get an idea of what are I mean, if they are running in Azure Cloud, they know what security and kind of privacy stuff they have to worry about and all that. So, or they're kind of they have to concern with. So that kind of instead of building their own entire infrastructure, now they're running in Azure. At the same time, with this mix of Azure Spring Apps and Azure, you have now you know regions of Azure across the globe where you can deploy these apps and get the benefit out of it instead of like doing it by yourself. Okay, so with that, I'm just gonna quickly jump into the demo. So in the meantime, any questions?
Nothing in the chat, Naveed, so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So instead of CLI, I just want to show you like how the creation experience look like. And while we are doing it, let's take a look at some of the available SKUs and all that. So I'm just going to do Azure Spring Apps, and I'm going to create the Azure Spring app uh, from here. And as you can see, this is pretty standard boilerplate code. I'm just going to give it a name. Demo Spring Apps 01. Okay, let's take a look at the SKUs first of all. So first is ignore the standard consumption SKU. Let's start with the basic one. Basic is when you want to run your development workload, non-prod workload. As you can see, there is no SLA here. Okay, there is no SLA, so you can run your developer workload. You can run those apps here, and for that environment. Then comes the standard. Standard comes with still open source Spring framework, but it has an SLA and it does support VNet integration as well. It's not shown here, but if you look at the details spec, it does support VNet integration. So if you have your apps, first of all, any case, if you are doing production, you should run standard or enterprise. But in any case, if you need VNet integration, you want to access resources inside your environment, in your virtual, I mean, and you have like on your on-prem environment, you need to access resources, then you have to run it inside a VNet, and that VNet is connected to on-prem, so you can access on-prem resources and things like that. So for that, you have to use standard. The third one is enterprise, and that enterprise uses VMware Tanzo framework. Okay, and just keep in mind that there would be some licensing cost for it. Once you do that, there is a higher SLA. So probably for enterprises that are have serious Spring App workload, they should look at it. And probably we will cover it in a separate session. In this one, I just want to kind of go over basic and standard and just the general feature of the platform itself. Okay, so with that, let's go back here. Then you have the diagnostic setting. And okay, I mean, one second. I was supposed to select standard. So let's select standard so I can show you the VNet integration piece as well. Diagnostics, so log analytic workspace. As I said, you know, you are in Azure, first party service is available. You don't want to use it, you want to use another service, that's totally fine. Okay. Application insights, that's available as well for your application. So log analytics for kind of infrastructure monitoring, application insight for application monitoring and performance management, and then networking. So a that's interesting. I mean, in this case, basically you need a virtual network with two subnets. Okay, one subnet will host your service runtime. So first of all, let me pick up a VNet, and yes, I already have that thing deployed, so that's why it's complaining. And you cannot deploy in the same VNet. So think of it that it will require a separate subnet. So you may have the same VNet, but you will have to have separate subnets. Number one, for your runtime, and number two, for your apps. So as you can see here, service runtime will go in a one subnet, and then Spring Boot Microsoft app, microservice app will go in a separate subnet. So you need two of these. And then this is important to note, the load balancer. By default, it creates a public load balancer. Okay. And that's how you access the service. If you don't want to do that, you can do some user defined routing magic to route it to a firewall, and that's another way of doing it. But at this moment, it does have a public endpoint. Otherwise, you use user defined routing. So these are the some of the things that you can do and go from there. Okay. As so pretty standard stuff. No in depth, like, okay, what VMs are you deploying or what Kubernetes clusters are you deploying? It's all done behind the scenes for you. Okay. So with that, let's go back to a cluster that we already have. Okay. So I'm gonna start with, first of all, a cluster that is not VNet injected. Okay. So I have this cluster. Once again, this is sorry, a Spring App service. I shouldn't say cluster, Spring App service. Pardon me. And this is the Spring App service. As you can see, this has apps. If you want to add storage to it, SSL settings, and the rest of the stuff is kind of standard. Of course, you have logs to monitor service, all of that, and you can change the pricing tier as well. Okay, with all that, let's look at the apps. That's where whatever apps that you have, that's going to be there. And the way you deploy app is first you have to create an app. Let's look at the app creation experience. So you can name it NZAPL 001, whatever name you want to name it. Then this is your artifacts. Are you deploying a custom container or you are deploying Java or something? And then what are the version of Java um, and .NET Core? If it's a custom container, then you will have to use whatever image you have. What are the number of CPUs? And then you have the what is the memory that you can add, how many instances. So if you think that your app is going to have a lot of load, You can add more instance and you can do auto scaling as well, but we will cover it probably in a separate session. So that's how you create it. Once you click the create button, it will take a couple of minutes to create the app. Okay. And then you can go ahead and you can deploy your code into the app. Here is what I'm going to do. I already have an app created, and let me see what I have here. Okay, let me just move this here. So this is the app that I already created, and let's take a look at this app. Okay, very simple. Um, I mean, this is how the structure look like, and by default, it does not create any URLs. You have to go in and you have to say assign an endpoint, and then it will assign an endpoint and it will create the app. Okay. So this is a very simple app. As you can see, I have this VS Spring, kind of a small app. It just display something on the screen, and that's all there is to it. So let me just change it here. I'm gonna say blue day and change it to dark blue color. And now I'm gonna compile and deploy this application. So let's see. First of all, let's there are a few interesting things that you can do with with this app, which is the deployment. So you can do blue green deployment. So you can have multiple, think of it, app service deployment slots. That's what there is to it. So let's go in here. Let's see what are the two deployments that we have. Okay. So right now, there are two deployments. One is a default, one is green. Okay. And as you can see, uh, the state of default is production. When it says it's production, it means that this is currently instance that is taking traffic. So that's very interesting stuff. What you can do is you can have like, let's say there's something running in production. You can deploy something that is uh, deployed in staging, and then switch it to change it to production. So basically, your blue deployment, green deployment, then green become production, then you deploy in blue, then blue become production, green becomes staging, things like that. So that's what it allows you to do. So right now, the default is production. So let's take a look at it. This is the URL. Let's click on this URL. Let's say, so as you can see, this is right now, this is showing, but we are updating this. So what we're going to do is we are going to compile this code. I have this URL here, sorry, this command line here, and I am going to first build this code, and then I am going to deploy it. In the meantime, any questions? So let's deploy this code now. Yeah, I think that's the wrong one. Let me just get the right command line and let's deploy this code. Okay, so here is the command line to deploy. And I hope everybody can see the screen. This is Spring App Deploy, the name of the resource group, name of the service, name of the application, what is the artifact path, and some generic Java stuff. So with that, I'm going to start deploying. It will take a couple of minutes to deploy, but while it is deploying, let's take a look at uh, a few other things. So you can, if we click on each deployment, it will show you what each deployment is doing. You can scale out what is the configuration. You can connect through console as well. Okay, so that's that's something um, about the apps. And if you want to make a particular uh, deployment active, the way you do it is simply make that production. So, it's a demo, so it's still deploying. So let's say if I want to make this screen production, as you can see, it says out of service. It means it is not taking traffic. I can go in here. I can either delete it or set as production. And by the way, just be careful. You can set all of these as staging as well. So then none will take any traffic. Okay. Okay. So finally, this slot is deployed. So let's see what is the new deployment, how it looks like. So I'm just going to go in here, refresh it, and you see we changed it, and now it's dark blue day. I mean, nothing, no earth-shattering application, but just to give you an idea, like how easy it is to deploy the Spring app from on-prem into the cloud and run it. So that's kind of a that's that. And in regards to switching it, so let's say we want to make the uh, green the production. So I'm going to go in here, set as at production, and it's going to say, do you want to continue? It will take a few minutes before, a minute or so once it switch that, and then you can go to that production as well. Okay. So while this is going on, I'm gonna switch thread. Okay, wow, that was quick. So let's do that. And with that, I'm gonna go in here and refresh the page again. And as you can see, it's back to the green slot is function. So that's how you can do blue-green deployment. Okay. So now I have an other um, Spring app that I have deployed that is running inside a virtual network. So that's VNet injected. If you go in the networking, it will show you how it is VNet injected. This is outbound IP address, VNet injection. This is the subnet where its runtime is running, and then this is the subnet where you have the apps that's gonna be deployed. Okay, and I have let's see what apps we have deployed here. Okay, so I have um, so once again, I have deployed a simple app here, simple app, and let's take a look. Now, as you can see here, there's a URL and there's a public URL. So by default, it does not create any URL. You have to go in and you have to create both public and private URL, and that's on you. If you create a private URL, that will only be accessible in the VNet where that um, where that Spring app is injected, and you have to set up the DNS and all that stuff that goes with it. So just keep that in mind. That is very well documented. Um, for example, let me just show you here in this one. Let's go into the resource groups, and this is our Spring App resource group. And I have created a private DNS zone. This is my private DNS zone, and this is pointing to, I have an A record. This is the URL. This is the private URL of this service. And let me increase the font size a little bit so hopefully everybody can see that. 1 second, guys. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So that, and then what I'm matching it is with the load balancer. So that's important. What you need to do is, and that's where you have to do, whenever it's VNet injected, you have to do a little bit of kind of I shouldn't call it trickery, but you have to look at what are the load balancer that are there, and then use the internal load balancer that is in the Spring Apps VNet, take the IP address of it and use that in the in the private DNS. Okay, so for example, if I go into all resources here and I say um, you know uh, resources. Oh, okay. Yeah. So these are the load balancers. So if I just say uh, Kubernetes, okay. So these are the two load balancer, and let's see which one is in the subnet where the apps are deployed. So you just find out their subnet, and then from that you can go and use that particular IP address. So this is the IP address configuration. So this is the one that is deployed in that particular subnet, the Spring App subnet. That's what you need. You set it up in this private DNS zone, and now um, I have a VM that I have deployed in the same VNet. And if I go to that VNet, 1 second, I can, you see, I can query it. And once again, it's showing me the same. I'm deploying the same app there as well. But just keep in mind that it's going to give you an error if you don't use a actual, I'm just using a self-signed certificate. So that's why it's happening. If you use an actual certificate, then an actual FQDN, that this error will go away. But just to give you an idea that this is when you have a VNet injected service, how you will access that service inside that particular VNet. Okay. So with that, one thing I want to show you about monitoring. So let's go in here. Actually, we can go into that service as well. And let's go into that resource group. And let's go into this app. And if we look at the logs, it will show us different queries. Let's run this query. Yeah, so as you can see, all the logs from the apps are being shown here. Okay, all the errors, exceptions, things like that. So you can look at the errors, you can find out if there are any issues. So once again, all the integration with the Azure ecosystem, if you want to use third party, that's totally fine. You can use that. There's no stopping There's no one stopping you from doing that. But if you want to use the first party services, so you can get the best of both worlds, both first party services. I mean, for both, you have your have your cake and eat it too. You have your Spring apps run in Azure, and then use the first party Azure services as well. So I know this is like a little bit over the time. I have 1 more minute. Any questions?
Read nothing on the chat, but was curious to see if the integration with GitHub, if it's there
Yes.
natively.
GitHub is there. Yes, natively GitHub is there. ADO is there, so you can deploy it. Basically, this is short time. Otherwise, we show like how you can deploy it into GitHub as well. Um, but yes, that integration is there as well. So that's the DevOps side of things. So you can deploy through Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions and push it into Spring Apps, as far as I know.
Awesome.
So with that, we are right on time. Thank you for joining and hope to see everybody um, another session of Azure Power Lunch next week and hope everybody had a great weekend. Thank you very much.
It'll be a great session.
Thank you.